Lots of people that listen to the podcast will probably have a good indication of, well, where's my body weight at? And I probably go to the gym and I do all the rest of the stuff. What else is happening? How else can I motivate myself to pick the healthier option, even if I know that my waistline isn't going to be the determining factor for this? I'm not. Obesity isn't that much of a risk for me. So what is it that could be happening? I think it's interesting to break it apart like that. I guess another area that I'm particularly interested in is brain health and energy levels when it comes to the impact of ultra-processed foods, added sugar, stuff like that. And that's probably one of the biggest areas that it also has an impact on. If you're eating a lot of added sugar, then you can basically be on the high end of the normal range for blood glucose levels. So you're within the normal range, but on the higher end, right? You're not diabetic, so you might think, oh, I don't have diabetes. I'm fine. I'm still within the normal range. But there are studies showing that people on the high end of the normal range have increased atrophy in the hippocampus, part of their brain that's involved in learning and memory, and they have higher atrophy in the amygdala, part of their brain that's involved in emotional regulation, compared to people who have blood glucose levels in the lower end of the normal range. So, that's an association study, right? There's also the angry and forgetful effect. But again, it's an association study. There are also other studies showing that higher blood glucose levels are associated with a 54% increased risk for vascular dementia. So, glucose, what it's doing when you have a constant intake of glucose, and that glucose isn't getting disposed of into your muscle, which is really where you want it. Exercise really helps with that. Is that it lingers in your bloodstream. You want it to go to your muscle instead of your adipose tissue. If that doesn't happen, if you're not exercising enough, the glucose will stay around in your bloodstream. What happens is, yes, there's an insulin response and all that metabolic stuff, but there's also something that happens that's called the Maillard reaction. It's where glucose reacts with lipids, DNA in your body, and proteins, and damages them. When it reacts with proteins like, for example, collagen lining your pericardium surrounding your heart, your myocardium surrounding your heart, or lining your blood vessels, it causes the collagen to become stiff. It changes the properties of the protein. It makes them stiff, kind of like trans fats, actually. That's a really good analogy. I didn't think about that, but it's really kind of the similar thing. It causes your blood vessels to become stiff. It causes the tissue surrounding your heart to become stiff, and that plays a major role in the stiffening of the heart with age, which affects cardiovascular disease risk. So you're talking about just an accumulation of this Maillard reaction. What happens is it forms something called advanced glycation, end products, and that's what is basically stiffening the proteins like collagen, which are around forever. Your collagen surrounding your heart is there, and you don't want it to get stiffer, right? So that's something to consider, as well as the fact that it is affecting cognition and the brain as well. We talked about brain aging. It causes inflammation. For example, I mentioned the study of men that consumed a 20-ounce sugar-sweetened beverage, and they had a 100% increase in their inflammatory markers after 3 weeks. Well, inflammation essentially means those molecules are getting into the brain, crossing over the blood-brain barrier, and they're getting into the brain. It was thought for a long time that inflammatory molecules don't cross the blood-brain barrier, but that years ago was debunked. We now know a lot of cytokines and inflammatory things are crossing the blood-brain barrier. And when they get into the brain, they are doing a variety of things. For one, they're affecting mood immediately. And we know that for a fact. We know causally. You can take a healthy person and inject them with lipopolysaccharide, which is something that's found in our gut. It's a component of bacterial membranes. We have a lot of bacteria in our gut. It makes up our microbiome. When you have leaky gut intestinal permeability, lipopolysaccharide gets into your circulation. Refined sugar does do that. You can inject normal, healthy people with lipopolysaccharide, or placebo, which is saline, and it causes massive inflammation, like what I just talked about with the sugar-sweetened beverage, and those people then end up getting depressive symptoms. So, it plays a role in their mood. But if you blunt that inflammatory response with something like EPA, which is a component of omega-3, it's one of the omega-3 fatty acids, it doesn't cause the depressive mood. So inflammation does affect mood. We also know that when you have a high inflammatory state, which I just gave a lot of evidence for in terms of added sugar, it changes the metabolism of tryptophan. Tryptophan is an essential amino acid we get from our diet. It's in proteins. It's a precursor for serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that's involved in cognition, executive function. It's involved in mood. What inflammation does is it causes tryptophan, instead of being converted into serotonin, to be converted into something called kynurenine, which is involved in inflammation. It's basically your body going, "Oh, I'm inflamed. I've got a pathogen." But there's no pathogen, it's actually just added sugar. Too much added sugar, right? Constantly. And so your body thinks it's a pathogen, and it's trying to then make anything it can to activate immune cells to take care of the pathogen. But the problem is, it's not a pathogen. So kynurenine helps with that whole immune system activation. But also, what it does as it's metabolized is it can form something called quinolinic acid, which is a neurotoxin and is also associated with depression. So, you're talking about inflammation, now affecting key metabolic processes that are important for cognition, executive function, and mood, and dampening those processes. You can immediately have an effect on cognition. I mean, you get like a quick sugar high, but boy, does that go away pretty quick. You immediately start to feel that sort of crash. If you wanted to reliably make your mental performance bad, having a donut and a Coke an hour before you were supposed to do something important is probably a pretty good way to do it. Exactly. It's almost like when you're sick. How you feel? You feel foggy, brain foggy, because your inflammation, your immune system, is activated. What do you recommend? And does it have to be difficult and onerous and expensive? How do you sort of stack the deck so you're like getting the basic things you need and not running into this trouble? Yeah, I do have some of the basic things that I think, well, that I take, but also that I think would help a majority of people that are insufficient in a lot of these micronutrients. And, first and foremost, vitamin D supplement. And again, I think, generally speaking, vitamin D, 4,000 IUs a day, pretty for the most part, gets people to a sufficient-ish level. You have to do a blood test to really know for certain. You may have to take a little more, but starting at 4,000 IUs a day, which is the upper tolerant, is safe. And this is actually by the National Academy of Sciences saying this is a safe level exactly. Number 2, omega-3 fatty acids. And this is something where Bill Harris has published studies looking at how do you get someone who is low omega-3 index, so 4% omega-3 index, up to an 8%? Turns out it takes close to about 2 grams a day, so 2 grams of EPA and DHA. So, so when you get, just for clarification purposes, if you get a pill and it says a gram of fish oil, it might not have a gram of EPA and DHA. It might be like 300 or 200 milligrams. So you have to look at the concentration of EPA and DHA in the milligram amounts on the label. Otherwise, it might take one pill or it could take 5 pills. Exactly. Um, so that, I think, is a pretty simple solution. So 1 to 2 grams, 1.5 to 2 grams, you get most people that are in a 4% low range to an 8%. And the balance of EPA and DHA, does it matter? Is it 50-50? Usually it's like a 2.1 ratio EPA to DHA for the most part. Something close to that. Okay. But I wouldn't sweat the small stuff. Like, number 3 and number 4 are kind of tied. But I think a multivitamin is a really good insurance because there's selenium, boron, yeah, there's, the B vitamins, there's vitamin A. There's so many different micronutrients, and it really covers a lot of the bases. So I think a pretty high-quality multivitamin is good, along with magnesium. So, magnesium, because such a large percentage of people are not getting enough magnesium. Magnesium, it is so important for a variety of, processes. DNA damage, brain function, muscle function. People that are physically active, they sweat out magnesium. So you might need anywhere between 10 to 20% more than the RDA. And stress and coffee also. Stress and alcohol. Exactly. So you're like, what is the American life? Stress, coffee, and alcohol. Exactly right. That's why we're all deficient. We're literally peeing it out. Yes. And so you want to make sure you're getting an organic salt. So that would be something like magnesium citrate, magnesium malate, magnesium, glycinate, and citrate if you're constipated. Right. So those are the organic salts, which are more bioavailable. I tell a funny story. I just decided. I was in the hospital recently for a back surgery, and I wanted to get magnesium. And I talked to the hospitalist, and he gave me magnesium oxide. And I'm like, that's not bioavailable. And I sort of went through this with him, and like you did, with that, it wasn't as confrontational as that, but he's like, oh, you're right. I look it up. And actually, no, true. I'm like, yep. So, but that's the main nutrient form of magnesium that you get in a lot of the supplements that you buy over the counter because it's the cheapest form. So, magnesium oxide. Oh, if you see that on the label, just skip over it. Right. So that would be another one. And then I add to my essentials the sulforaphane. I used to sprout, and I no longer do that because life is busy. My excuse is, I'm so, busy telling the world how to eat better and be healthy. It's like the worst thing you can do for your health. But, I trust the science that I've read. Looking at, the supplement that I take, which, again, it's a really good supplement. And they have about the advanced formula is what I take. I take about 2 to 4 a day, depending on, and we'll put the link in the show notes for that. They're great. And they, publish studies on them, improving autism. So it's affecting the brain. So it's improved autism, spectrum disorder in kids with autism, adolescents with autism. But it's a very strong activator of glutathione, right? So, NRF2 pathway. So that's my phytochemical. I actually wrote a blog about glutathione years ago. If anybody wants to sort of find out more about glutathione, go to Hymen and glutathione and you'll find it. And it's kind of the master detoxifier, the master antioxidant, the master immune regulator. It's like, it's so critical, and you get it through some of these plant foods. You get it by sulfur-containing amino acids, which are found often in animal foods or in whey protein. It's a great source. It is. Yeah. So it's a major, major antioxidant in the body. So, I think those are really some of the vitamin D. Fish oil, vitamin D, 4,000. Fish oil, 1 or 2 grams of the actual EPA DHA. A multivitamin and high quality. High quality meaning it shouldn't be blue or purple or green or yellow and titanium and dyes, and should be just, the right. And the bioavailability, the formula, nutrient matters. I think you and I both have done a lot of work on this, and people can dig around, but it's not just like go to get your, Walgreens or CVS multivitamins. A little more judicious. And then magnesium. And how much magnesium? It depends. So some people get a laxative effect, and they want that. That's with citrate. Um, even with higher doses of other forms they can. But yeah. So I think it depends on your diet. Like if you're not eating a lot of plants, shame on you. You need to increase that. But about 250, 300 milligrams, is a good range. Now, if you're trying to treat like migraines and stuff, you might have to go higher. Like some studies show like 600 milligrams. And then there's the form of magnesium threonate, that's thought to cross the blood-brain barrier more effectively. For brain health. Because magnesium doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier very well. But magnesium threonate it's not necessarily going to do the DNA damage repair aspect of magnesium. So make sure you're getting both if you're doing that. Yeah. So like for me, I take like 250 milligrams, maybe 300